Some truths arrive like winter, slow, inevitable, and cruel enough to freeze the breath in your lungs. For Milena Valen, the truth came the day she understood that love was a currency she could never afford. In a world where vampire bloodlines measure worth in crimson vitality, she was born insufficient. Her veins ran thin, her blood weak, her body incapable of sustaining the legacy her noble family prized above all else. She couldn't be turned. Couldn't nourish the immortal. Couldn't carry forward the ancient power that flowed through her mother's veins like liquid gold. She had spent her childhood clinging to fragile hopes, that perhaps her blood would strengthen with age, that some miracle would make her whole, that the emptiness inside her would somehow fill with the power her family desperately needed. But hope, she learned, was the cruelest gift of all. Because when it finally shattered, you didn't just feel the pain of what you lacked, you felt the agony of having dared to dream you could be more. The Vampire King's envoy arrived on a day when the sky itself seemed to mourn. Thunder rolled across the golden wheat fields as Milena stood in the doorway of their manor, watching the crimson-cloaked figure approach. His presence seemed to drain the light from the afternoon, casting long shadows that reached toward their home like grasping fingers. Inside, her mother's voice cut through the storm's distant rumble. "Lord Cassius, we are honored by your presence." Milena remained by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew why he was here. The king required tributes, noble daughters to serve in his court, to strengthen alliances, to offer their precious blood to the Ancient Ones. Her younger sister Alara stood beside their mother, radiant and perfect, her blood so rich it practically sang through her skin. The envoy's eyes, ancient and calculating, swept across the room before landing on Alara. "The king seeks an offering from House Valen. Your family's bloodline has always been exceptional." Milena watched as her mother's hand tightened on Alara's shoulder, pulling her daughter closer. A gesture of protection. Of possession. "My lord," her mother's voice carried the weight of aristocratic grace, "Alara is promised to House Draven. The betrothal contracts are signed. She will strengthen our alliance through marriage and produce heirs of unmatchable power." The envoy's gaze hardened. "House Valen has been summoned to provide tribute. Do you refuse the Vampire King?" Silence stretched through the room like a death sentence. Then her mother's eyes found Milena in the doorway. Something flickered across her face, relief mixed with cold calculation. When she spoke again, her voice carried no hesitation. "Take my eldest daughter instead." The words should have shocked her. They didn't. Lord Cassius turned, studying Milena with undisguised contempt. "This one? She reeks of deficiency." "She is blood deficient," her mother stated flatly, the clinical term stripping away any remnants of maternal connection. "Unable to be turned, unable to sustain the immortal, unable to bear vampire heirs. She has brought nothing but shame to our house." Each word landed like a physical blow, though Milena kept her face carefully blank. She'd practiced this expression for years, the mask that hid humiliation, rejection, the constant reminder that she was less than worthless in their world. Her former betrothed discovered her condition, her mother continued, and dissolved their contract within the year. "No vampire family will have her. But perhaps," she paused delicately, "the king has use for servants who require no special considerations. No costly blood rations. No risk of turning accidents. No risk of anything valuable being lost," Alara added quietly, and Milena's chest constricted at the casual cruelty in her sister's voice. Lord Cassius circled Milena like a predator assessing prey. She stood perfectly still, refusing to cower, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "The king does not accept refuse," he said coldly. "My lord," Milena's voice surprised even herself, steady, clear, cutting through the tension. "I understand what I am. I understand what I lack. But I also understand that the king's court requires more than just blood donors. I read 7 languages. I've studied history, diplomacy, and courtly arts since childhood. I am capable of serving in ways that don't require the one thing I cannot provide. Her mother's sharp intake of breath told Milena she'd crossed some invisible line by speaking at all. The envoy studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his ancient eyes. Then he smiled, a cold, terrible expression that sent ice down her spine. "How peculiar," he murmured. "The broken one has spirit." He turned to her mother. "The king will accept this offering. But understand, House Valen will not receive the honors typically granted for tribute. You trade us your shame, not your treasure." "We understand, my lord." "Prepare her. We leave at sunset." The next hours passed in a blur of mechanical preparation. No tearful farewells. No embraces. Her mother provided traveling clothes without meeting her eyes. Ilara remained in her chambers, silent and safe. As the sun began its descent, painting the wheat fields in shades of amber and gold, Milena was led outside. The envoy had shifted into something between man and shadow, his form seeming to blur at the edges as dusk approached. A figure waited in the field, tall, imposing, wrapped in a crimson cloak that moved like liquid blood in the wind. Even from a distance, Milena could feel the weight of his presence, the raw power that emanated from him like heat from flame. Her father emerged from the house, his face carefully neutral. He walked past Milena without a word, approaching the cloaked figure with the practiced deference of a man negotiating with death itself. She watched as they spoke in low tones, watched as her father extended his hand. The handshake that followed seemed to ripple through reality, a binding sealed not just with touch but with something far more ancient and absolute. The storm clouds gathered darker overhead. Thunder rolled like drums announcing execution. The cloaked figure finally turned toward her, and though she couldn't see his face beneath the hood, she felt his attention like a physical weight. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee across the golden fields and never look back. But there was nowhere to go. She'd learned that truth long ago. As she was led forward through the wheat, stalks whispering against her skirts, Milena kept her gaze lowered. Not from submission, though that's what they would think, but from determination. If she was going to die, if she was going to disappear into the Vampire King's castle like so many before her, she would do it with whatever dignity remained to her. What no one saw, not her family, not the envoy, not even the imposing figure in crimson, was the strange sensation flickering inside her chest. An awareness she'd never understood, never knew how to name. The ability to sense something beyond blood and power, beyond strength and lineage. She could feel souls. The texture of consciousness, the weight of ancient hungers, the sharp edges of pain hidden behind fanged smiles. It had always been there, this peculiar sensitivity that made the world feel too intense, too overwhelming. Another defect, she'd assumed. Another way she was broken. But as she drew closer to the Vampire King's emissary, as his shadow fell across her like a shroud, she felt something that made her breath catch. Hunger. Not for blood. For something far more dangerous. For understanding. For recognition. For someone who could see past the monster to the soul beneath. The storm broke overhead, rain beginning to fall in cold, heavy drops. And somewhere in the distance, the castle of the Vampire King waited in the gathering darkness. Dawn came late to the Vampire King's domain, as if even the sun feared to illuminate what darkness had claimed. Milena had traveled through the night, bound in a carriage with blackened windows that prevented her from seeing where they were taking her. Lord Cassius rode in silence, offering no explanations, no comfort, not that she expected either. When the carriage finally stopped and the door opened, the sight that greeted her stole her breath. The castle rose against the pale morning sky like a monument to beautiful devastation. Black stone towers twisted upward, their architecture both elegant and threatening. Crimson banners hung from battlements, barely moving in the still air. Everything about it whispered of power, ancient and absolute. "Move," Lord Cassius commanded, gripping her arm and pulling her from the carriage. But they didn't enter through the grand entrance where she could see nobles in elaborate dress moving like shadows through marble halls. Instead, he led her down a narrow side path, beneath an archway carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in her peripheral vision, down stone steps that descended deep into the castle's foundations. The air grew colder with each step. Damp. Heavy with the scent of earth and something metallic she tried not to identify. They emerged into a stone chamber lit by flickering torches. 5 other girls were already there, huddled together on rough wooden benches. All looked terrified. All avoided meeting her eyes when she entered. Milena kept her expression carefully neutral. She refused to give them, or anyone, the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "You will wait here," Lord Cassius stated. "Mistress Thorn will prepare you." He vanished back up the stairs, leaving them in heavy silence. The other girls began whispering to each other, "Where are we? What will they do to us?" I heard the king feeds on servant girls, but Milena remained quiet, studying the chamber. The walls were clean but ancient. The torches burned with unnatural steadiness. Everything about this place spoke of careful control, of power that didn't need to announce itself. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A woman entered, tall, severe, with silver-streaked hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her pale skin. Her eyes were dark amber, indicating she was a turned vampire of considerable age. "On your feet," she commanded in a voice like cracking ice. They all stood immediately. Mistress Thorn circled them slowly, assessing each girl with cold calculation. When her gaze landed on Milena, something flickered in those ancient eyes, recognition of what she was. The defective one. "You are now property of the Vampire King," she stated flatly. "Everything you thought belonged to you, your dignity, your modesty, your choices, now belongs to him. Is this understood?" Silent nods all around. "Strip." The command hung in the air like a knife. When the girls hesitated, Mistress Thorn's voice sharpened. "Did I stutter? The king will not have filthy tribute in his castle. You will be cleansed, dressed appropriately, and taught your place. Now strip, or I will have the guards do it for you." One by one, trembling hands reached for laces and buttons. Milena moved methodically, folding her clothes with precise care, refusing to show the humiliation burning through her chest. She'd survived worse degradations. She would survive this. Into the washing chamber. They were herded into an adjoining room where servants waited with buckets and rough soap. The first bucket of ice-cold water hit Milena like a physical assault, stealing her breath, shocking her system. Rough hands scrubbed her skin until it felt raw, washing her hair twice, combing through it with painful efficiency. Through it all, she kept her mind carefully distant, floating somewhere above the humiliation, above the fear. It was a skill she'd perfected over years of being treated as less than human, or in her case, less than vampire. When they were finally deemed acceptable, they were given plain gray shifts to wear. The fabric was coarse, clearly marking them as servants of the lowest order. Mistress Thorn gathered them back in the chamber, her expression one of cold satisfaction at their obvious discomfort. "You will learn the castle rules," she began. "Where you may go. Where you are forbidden. Whom you may address and how. The penalty for disobedience is severe. The king does not tolerate disruption in his household." She paused, letting that sink in. "Most of you will serve in various capacities: kitchen work, cleaning, attending to the needs of the noble court. You will be invisible. Silent. Efficient. Most of you." The words hung heavy with implication. Mistress Thorne's gaze swept across them before landing specifically on Milena. One of you will be assigned a special duty. Tonight, you will meet the Night Reaver. The name sent visible shudders through the other girls. Milena felt her blood run cold even as she maintained her blank expression. She'd heard whispers of the Night Reaver, the creature that served the king, some said. Others claimed it was the king himself, transformed by ancient curse into something monstrous when darkness fell. Stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: those who encountered the Night Reaver rarely survived the experience. The blood-deficient one, Mistress Thorne said, pointing directly at Milena. You will serve the Night Reaver. Of course. The broken one sent to the monster. It made perfect sense in the cruel logic of this world. Prepare her, Mistress Thorne ordered the servants. The sun sets in 3 hours. As hands reached for her, pulling her toward another chamber, Milena's mind raced. She'd expected death when her mother sold her away. Perhaps this was simply a different form of execution, slower, more terrifying, but inevitable nonetheless. But that strange sensation in her chest flickered again. That awareness of souls, of the emotional texture that lived beneath flesh and fang. And she wondered, with a curiosity that felt dangerously like hope. What kind of soul could a monster possibly have? They dressed her in white. Not the pristine, beautiful white of a bride, but the pale, bloodless white of a sacrifice. The fabric hung loose on her frame, almost translucent in the torchlight, making her look even more fragile than she felt. Her hair was left unbound, falling in dark waves down her back, another deliberate choice, she suspected. Everything about her presentation screamed vulnerability. The servants wouldn't meet her eyes as they worked. One girl, barely older than Milena herself, whispered a prayer under her breath while fastening the simple cord around Milena's waist. The sound of it, that desperate plea to gods who'd never answered her own prayers, made something harden in Milena's chest. She wouldn't beg. Wouldn't pray. If death was coming, she'd face it standing. Mistress Thorne returned as the sun touched the horizon, painting the narrow window in shades of dying light. It's time. They led her deeper into the castle, down corridors that twisted like a labyrinth, past doors that seemed to breathe with whatever lived behind them. The temperature dropped with each turn, until Milena could see her breath misting in the air. The stone walls here were different, older, carved with symbols that made her head ache when she looked at them too long. Finally, they stopped before a massive door of black iron. It was covered in chains that looked more ceremonial than functional, each link etched with the same twisting symbols that decorated the walls. You will enter alone, Mistress Thorne stated. You will not scream. You will not run. You will not speak unless spoken to. If you survive until dawn, you will be returned to the servant quarters. If you do not, she paused, her ancient eyes holding something that might have been pity. Well. Few do. The door opened with a sound like grinding bones. Darkness swallowed the space beyond, so complete it seemed solid. Milena felt the weight of it pressing against her skin, tasted it metallic and strange on her tongue. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to fight, to do anything except step forward into that absolute blackness. But there was nowhere to run. There never had been. She stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her, and for several heartbeats, there was nothing. No light. No sound. Just darkness so thick it felt like drowning. Then she felt it, that strange awareness flickering to life in her chest. The sensation that had always been more curse than gift, making her too sensitive, too aware of things she couldn't name. But here, in this darkness, it sharpened into something else entirely. She could feel a presence in the room with her. Massive. Ancient. Radiating pain so profound it made her own suffering feel like a shallow scratch compared to a mortal wound. Her breath caught. You're afraid. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, deep and fractured, like stone grinding against stone. They always are. Milena forced herself to speak past the terror clawing up her throat. Yes. A pause. As if her honesty surprised whatever lurked in the darkness. Yet you don't scream. Closer now. She could feel movement in the air, something circling her like a predator. Why? Screaming wouldn't change anything. Her voice remained steady even as her hands trembled. Would it? No. Something that might have been dark amusement colored the word. It wouldn't. She felt it then, a presence directly behind her, close enough that she could feel cold radiating from it like winter incarnate. Close enough that she knew one movement, one wrong breath, could end her. But that awareness in her chest pulled tighter, showing her something the darkness tried to hide. Beneath the crushing weight of power, beneath the hunger and the rage and the ancient cruelty, there was something else. Loneliness. Devastating and absolute. You're in pain, she whispered before she could stop herself. The presence went utterly still. What did you say? Danger threaded through every syllable. Milena knew she should take it back, should fall silent, should do anything except continue. But that sensation in her chest wouldn't let her. She'd spent her entire life being told she was broken, defective, worth nothing. If she was going to die anyway, she'd die speaking truth. You're in pain, she repeated, turning slowly to face the darkness where she felt the presence strongest. I can feel it. Like something inside you is tearing itself apart. Has been for a very long time. Silence stretched so long she thought perhaps she'd already died and simply hadn't realized it yet. Then, light. A single candle flame sparked to life across the room, then another, then dozens more, revealing the chamber in flickering shadows. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the Night Reaver. He was massive, easily 7 feet tall, his form seeming to shift between solid and shadow, as if reality couldn't quite decide what he was. Darkness clung to him like a second skin, writhing and alive. His eyes glowed with crimson light, burning in a face that was both beautiful and terrible, human and monstrous, trapped somewhere between both states. But what stole her breath wasn't his appearance. It was his soul. She could see it, or rather, feel it, fractured into countless pieces, each one screaming silently, each one trapped in eternal agony. It was the most devastating thing she'd ever encountered, and she'd encountered plenty of devastation in her short life. You can sense it. His voice was rough with something that might have been wonder or might have been rage. You can actually feel it. Yes. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. How do you bear it? The Night Reaver stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten existed. As if the simple question, not how do you cause pain, but how do you bear it, had reached something inside him that hadn't been touched in centuries. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. No one has ever asked me that before. The Night Reaver didn't kill her that first night. He didn't touch her at all. He simply stood there in the flickering candlelight, staring at her as if she were some impossible creature that had wandered into his prison by accident. When dawn finally broke, painting thin lines of light beneath the iron door, the darkness around him began to writhe more violently, pulling him back into shadow until he vanished entirely, leaving her alone in the chamber. Mistress Thorne's shock at finding her alive was poorly concealed. You will return tonight, was all she said, though her ancient eyes held questions she didn't voice. The second night, Milena entered the chamber with less terror and more curiosity. The moment the door closed, she felt him materialize in the darkness, that crushing presence filling the space. You came back. His voice carried something she couldn't quite name. Surprise, perhaps. Or suspicion. Did I have a choice? A sound that might have been dark laughter. No. But most spend the day begging not to return. Screaming. Pleading for mercy. Would it work? No. Then it seems pointless. She moved further into the room, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. May I sit? Another pause. Then candles sparked to life again, revealing the chamber more clearly than before. It wasn't a torture room, as she'd expected. Books lined one wall, their spines ancient and cracking. A massive chair sat near the far corner, carved from black wood and worn smooth by centuries of use. Sit. He gestured toward a smaller chair that hadn't been there the previous night. She settled into it, arranging her white shift carefully, aware of his eyes tracking her every movement. He remained standing, maintaining distance, as if afraid of what might happen if he came too close. Why aren't you afraid of me? The question erupted from him like something he'd been holding back all day. Milena considered this carefully. I am afraid of you. But fear and understanding aren't opposites. I can be terrified of what you could do to me while still recognizing what you are beneath it. And what am I? Dangerous edge to the words. Trapped. She met his burning gaze. Whatever you are, whoever you were, you're trapped in this form. And it's tearing you apart from the inside. He moved then, crossing the space between them so quickly she barely registered it. He loomed over her, darkness swirling, power crackling in the air like a gathering storm. She should have cowered. Should have begged forgiveness for her presumption. Instead, she remained still, that awareness in her chest showing her what existed beneath his rage. The desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could finally see him. You know nothing about what I am, he growled. You're right. Her voice stayed steady. I know nothing about you. But I can feel your soul, and it's screaming. It's been screaming for so long that pain has become your only constant. And I think, she paused, gathering courage, I think you've forgotten what it feels like to have someone acknowledge that pain instead of just fearing the monster it created. The Night Reaver went utterly still. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of candle flames and her own thundering heartbeat. Then he stepped back, the darkness around him seeming to shudder. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. They send me the broken ones. The defective. The ones no one wants. Did you know that? I suspected. Easy to dispose of. No one asks questions when a blood-deficient servant disappears into the Night Reaver's chamber. He turned away, moving toward the books. You should hate me. Should I? I've killed before. Have you killed me? Not yet. Then perhaps, Milena said quietly, we should focus on that. On what you haven't done, rather than what you have. He laughed then, a sound so broken it made her chest ache. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? This time his laugh held something almost genuine. He moved to the bookshelf, trailing dark fingers across ancient spines. Do you read? The question surprised her. Yes. 7 languages. Of course you do. Something that might have been approval colored his tone. The broken noble daughter, educated beyond her worth. He pulled a volume from the shelf. This is in Old Valthic. Can you read it? She stood, moving closer despite every survival instinct warning her against it. When he handed her the book, their fingers brushed, his ice cold against her warmth. That contact sent a shock through her entire body, and she gasped at the intensity of sensation that flooded through her awareness. His soul, fractured and screaming, reaching toward her like a drowning man grasping for air. He jerked back, darkness swirling violently around him. Don't. It doesn't hurt me. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. When we touch, I can feel your pain, yes. But it doesn't hurt me. She struggled to find words for something she'd never experienced before. It just is. Like looking at a wound. Seeing it doesn't make you bleed. The Night Reaver stared at her as if she'd performed some impossible miracle. No one has ever been able to touch me without screaming. Then perhaps, Milena said softly, opening the book with trembling hands, no one has ever really touched you at all. The night stretched long after that. She read to him from the ancient text, stumbling over words in a dead language, while he listened from the shadows. And for the first time in either of their lives, the darkness felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. When dawn came again, he spoke one last time before dissolving into shadow. Come back tomorrow, Milena Valen. It was the first time he'd used her name. The first time he'd asked instead of commanded. The first time she realized she wanted to return. The nights became a rhythm. A dangerous, intoxicating rhythm that Milena found herself craving more than she'd ever craved anything in her worthless life. Each sunset, she would enter the iron door with less hesitation. Each dawn, she would leave with more questions than answers. And between those moments, between darkness and light, something was growing that neither of them knew how to name. By the seventh night, the Night Reaver was waiting for her when she entered, candles already lit, books already selected. He'd begun manifesting more solid form in her presence, the writhing shadows settling into something almost human, though darkness still clung to him like a second skin. You're different tonight, Milena observed, settling into what had become her chair. More present. Your presence calms the curse. His voice was still rough, but the grinding stone quality had softened. When you're here, the pain recedes. Not entirely, but enough that I can think clearly. Enough that I can remember what it felt like to be. He stopped abruptly. To be what? Someone other than this. He gestured to himself, to the darkness, to the prison of his own existence. Tell me something, Milena. In all your noble education, did they teach you about the sovereign curse? She searched her memory. Only fragments. An ancient punishment for kings who betrayed sacred vows. The cursed would be split, beauty in daylight, beast in darkness. Forever trapped between two forms, never whole in either. Close enough. He moved to the window, though no light penetrated the thick stone. I am King Kale Umbrax. Or I was, before the curse. During the day, I wear a crown and sit on a throne and play at being the ruler everyone fears. But when night falls, the darkness around him pulsed, I become this. The Night Reaver. The monster in the castle. The thing that haunts even other vampires' nightmares. Milena's breath caught. You're the vampire king. Half of him, anyway. Bitter humor laced his words. The other half pretends quite convincingly during daylight hours. We share memories but not consciousness. He knows what I do in darkness. I know what he does in light. But we cannot communicate. Cannot coordinate. We are one soul torn in two, each half suffering the other's choices. That's why you're in so much pain. Understanding flooded through her. You're not just cursed, you're fractured. Constantly at war with yourself. For 2 centuries. He turned back to face her. 200 years of this splitting, this tearing, this endless cycle of transformation that feels like dying twice every day. Dawn and dusk, those are the worst moments. When one form must surrender to the other. When the soul rips itself apart and stitches back together in a different configuration. She stood, moving toward him without thinking. Is there a cure? His laugh was hollow. Oh, there's always a cure. These curses are designed by sadists with a taste for irony. The sovereign curse can only be broken by, he paused, and even in the darkness she could sense his hesitation, by finding someone who can love both halves. Someone who can see the king and the beast and choose them both, wholly and without reservation. True love, they call it. As if such a thing exists. You don't believe in love? I believe in power. In blood. In the inevitability of betrayal. He moved closer, and she could feel the cold radiating from him, see the crimson glow of his eyes. Love is a fairy tale told to children who haven't yet learned that the world devours the weak. I was weak, Milena said softly. My entire life, I was the weak one. The broken one. The defective daughter who couldn't fulfill her purpose. And you're right, the world tried to devour me. My own family fed me to the wolves without hesitation. Then you understand. I understand that I survived anyway. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, giving him every opportunity to pull away. When her fingers touched his arm, that shock of connection flooded through her again, his fractured soul crying out, her strange gift reaching back. I understand that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. It just means you've survived things that should have destroyed you. His hand came up, covering hers. His touch was ice cold, but she didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away. Something was shifting between them, something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. You're dangerous, he whispered, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. More dangerous than any enemy I've ever faced. How? Because you make me hope. His other hand rose, fingertips ghosting along her jaw, never quite touching but close enough that she felt the cold shadow of contact. And hope is the cruelest weapon of all. Milena's heart hammered against her ribs. She should be afraid. Should recognize this moment for what it was, a predator circling prey, a monster testing boundaries. But that awareness in her chest showed her something different. Showed her a soul so starved for genuine connection that even the possibility of it felt like sunlight after centuries of darkness. What if hope isn't a weapon? She breathed. What if it's just hope? He leaned closer, his face inches from hers, and she could see the struggle playing out across his monstrous features. The war between hunger and restraint, between wanting and fear of wanting. If I kiss you, he said roughly, I won't want to stop. Then don't stop. The words had barely left her lips when his mouth claimed hers, ice cold and desperate, tasting of darkness and 200 years of starvation. She gasped against him, and he swallowed the sound, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pulled her closer. The darkness around him writhed, wrapping around them both like a living thing, and through their connection she felt his soul reaching, grasping, drowning in the first genuine warmth it had known since the curse began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes blazed crimson. This changes everything, he warned. I know. They'll try to destroy you. I know. I might destroy you myself. I know. She touched his face, feeling the strange texture where shadow met flesh. But perhaps we're both tired of being destroyed alone. Everything changed after that kiss, and yet nothing changed at all. Milena still entered the iron door each night. Still read to him from ancient texts, still felt his fractured soul reaching for hers in the darkness. But now there was something else humming between them, want, raw and undeniable, complicated by the knowledge that he was both man and monster, king and beast. And she was falling for both. By the 12th night, Cale had begun telling her stories of his past. Fragments of memory from before the curse, when he'd been only a king and not a creature of nightmare. He spoke of betrayal, of a sacred vow broken in desperation, of the witch who'd cursed him with cold satisfaction in her ancient eyes. I deserved it, he admitted, his voice rough with old shame. What I did, there's no justification for it. The curse is justice, not cruelty. Milena had learned not to argue when he fell into these dark moods. Instead, she simply moved closer, let him feel her presence, let her strange gift wrap around his fractured soul like a balm on a wound that never healed. But she'd also begun to wonder about the other half. About King Kale in Daylight, the version who ruled the vampire court with an iron fist, who everyone feared but no one knew was trapped in the same cursed prison as the Night Reaver. "Have you ever seen him?" she asked one night. "Your daytime self? Do you know what he looks like?" "We share memories but not reflection." Kale's darkness swirled restlessly. "I know what he does, what he says, how he moves through the world wearing my face. But I've never seen it." "Why?" "I just wondered if," she hesitated, uncertain how to voice the thought, "if I would recognize you. In daylight. If I passed you in the castle halls." His silence stretched long and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a warning. "You won't see me in the castle, Milena. You're a servant. I'm a king. Our worlds don't intersect in daylight. But they intersect in darkness. Darkness hides many things. Light reveals them all." He moved away from her, putting distance between them. "And some things are better left hidden." She should have recognized the retreat for what it was. Should have given him space. Instead, that stubborn core of defiance that had kept her alive through years of rejection flared hot. "You're afraid," she said. "I'm a 200-year-old vampire cursed to become a shadow creature every night. I'm not afraid of anything. You're afraid of what might happen if the daytime king knows about me. About us." The candles flickered violently, responding to his surge of emotion. "There is no us, Milena. There's a broken servant and a monster who finds temporary relief in her presence. That's all this can ever be." The words struck like physical blows, but she'd endured worse pain from her own family. She stood, moving toward him despite the danger crackling in the air. "Then why do you ask me to come back every night? Why do you tell me your secrets, your pain, your history? Why did you kiss me like a drowning man finding air?" "Because I'm selfish." He spun to face her, darkness writhing around him like living fury. "Because for a few hours each night, you make me forget what I am. You make me feel almost human again, almost whole. But that doesn't change reality." "What reality?" "That I'm a king and you're nothing." The words erupted from him, vicious and cutting. "You have no blood power, no family standing, no worth in the vampire world. You're a defective human who was traded away like refuse. And his voice cracked, "I am cursed to rule a kingdom I can never fully control, to exist in perpetual torment, to face eternity alone because no one could ever love both halves of this broken existence." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're right. I am nothing. I've been told that my entire life. But at least I'm honest about what I am. At least I don't pretend that pushing someone away is the same as protecting them. I am protecting you." He crossed the space between them in an instant, grabbing her shoulders, his touch ice-cold even through the thin fabric of her shift. "Do you understand what would happen if the court discovered you? If they learned that the Night Reaver has formed an attachment to a blood-deficient servant? They would use you against me. Torture you. Destroy you in the most creative ways imaginable, just to watch me suffer. Then we hide it. We can't hide this forever." His grip tightened, desperate. "Eventually, dawn will come and you'll still be here, and the daytime king will wake with memories of you in his arms. And then," he released her abruptly, stepping back, "then everything falls apart." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying this ends now." The words came out flat, final. "Tomorrow night, you won't return. I'll tell Mistress Thorne to assign you to kitchen duties. You'll live out your servitude in the castle, far away from this chamber, far away from me." "You don't mean that." "I do." But his voice wavered, and she could feel the lie in every fractured piece of his soul. You'll be safer without me. You'll survive longer. I'll be alone, she interrupted, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. Just like you. Two broken people, deliberately choosing loneliness because it hurts less than hoping for something better. Sometimes loneliness is the only kindness we can offer each other. She stared at him, at the monster who'd shown her more gentleness than any human ever had, at the cursed king who made her feel seen for the first time in her worthless life. And she made a choice. Then I choose unkindness, she whispered. I choose hope, even if it destroys me. I choose you, Kale Umbrax. Both halves, both forms, all the broken pieces. Because maybe, just maybe, being destroyed together is better than surviving alone. He stood frozen, darkness writhing violently around him, clearly torn between pulling her close and pushing her away forever. But before he could decide, before he could speak, dawn broke. She watched in horror as his form began to shimmer, the transformation starting, the curse ripping him apart as it did every morning. He fell to his knees, a sound of agony tearing from his throat. And Milena, defying every order, every warning, every instinct for self-preservation, wrapped her arms around him and held on as the darkness consumed them both. Milena woke in her own narrow bed in the servants' quarters with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Her body ached as if she'd been thrown against stone, and her mind felt fractured, still echoing with the agony she'd felt pouring through Kale during his transformation. She'd held him as darkness and dawn collided, felt his curse tearing him apart, felt his soul screaming as one form surrendered to another. Then, nothing. Blackness. And now this. She sat up slowly, her white shift torn at the shoulder, dried blood on her hands though she couldn't find any wounds. Around her, the other servant girls slept on, undisturbed. No one had noticed her absence. No one cared. 3 days passed with no summons to the iron door. 3 days of kitchen work, of scrubbing floors, of keeping her head down and her mouth shut while other servants gossiped about the castle's dark secrets. She learned that the vampire king had been in foul temper lately, that he'd dismissed half his council in a rage, that even the oldest vampires were walking carefully around him. She learned that no one connected his mood to a blood-deficient servant girl who'd once been sent to the Night Reaver. On the 4th day, Mistress Thorne found her elbow-deep in dishwater. You. The vampire's voice cut through the kitchen noise. Lord Cassius requires a servant to attend a visiting dignitary. You'll do. Milena's heart lurched. My lady, You think you have a choice? Mistress Thorne's amber eyes narrowed. The dignitary arrives within the hour. You will be presentable, silent, and obedient. Am I understood? Yes, my lady. She was scrubbed, dressed in a clean gray shift, and positioned in the grand entrance hall before she could fully process what was happening. Around her, the castle's daytime glory revealed itself, marble columns soaring toward vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers catching sunlight through tall windows, nobles in elegant dress moving through the space like beautiful predators. And there, at the center of it all, sat the vampire king on his obsidian throne. Milena's breath stopped. He was beautiful. Devastatingly, impossibly beautiful. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, his features sharp and aristocratic, his posture radiating absolute authority. He wore black and crimson, a crown of silver thorns resting on his head, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. But his eyes, those eyes were the same burning crimson she knew from darkness. Kale. This was Kale in daylight. The king. The other half. And he had no idea she was standing 30 feet away, just another invisible servant among dozens. She watched as he received the visiting dignitary, a vampire lord from the Eastern Territories, with cold courtesy. Watched as he moved with lethal grace, every gesture calculated, every word precisely chosen. This was a man who'd ruled for 200 years, who commanded fear with a glance, who showed no weakness, no warmth, no hint of the suffering creature who'd held her in the darkness. But she could feel it. That awareness in her chest that had always made her different, that strange gift that let her sense souls, it showed her the truth beneath his perfect facade. He was in agony. The same fractured, screaming soul, just wrapped in daylight flesh instead of shadow. "Wine for our guest," Lord Cassius commanded, and suddenly a servant was pressing a crystal decanter into Milena's hands, pushing her forward toward the throne. She moved on instinct, years of noble training taking over even as panic flooded her veins. She approached the dais, keeping her eyes lowered, her movements precise and unobtrusive. Just another servant. Nothing to notice. Nothing to. "You." The Vampire King's voice stopped her mid-step. She froze, the decanter trembling in her hands. "Look at me." She had no choice. Slowly, fighting every screaming instinct, she raised her eyes to meet his. Recognition didn't flash across his face. How could it? He'd never seen her in daylight, never known what she looked like beyond shadow and candlelight. But something else flickered in those crimson depths. Confusion. As if some part of him, some buried memory from his other half, was trying to surface. "What is your name?" His voice was cold, commanding, nothing like the raw vulnerability she'd heard in darkness. "Milena Valen, Your Majesty." His expression didn't change, but she felt it, the shock rippling through his soul, the sudden recognition, the war between his daytime consciousness and the memories his night self had left him. He knew this name. Knew what it meant. Knew what had happened in the darkness while he ruled in light. Valen. He repeated it slowly, as if tasting poison. "House Valen traded you as tribute." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And you were assigned to..." He stopped, and she watched something dangerous flash across his perfect features, special duties. The entire hall had gone silent, nobles and servants alike sensing the sudden tension. "Yes, Your Majesty." He stood then, descending from his throne with predatory grace. Each step toward her felt like a countdown to execution. When he reached her, he was close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him, different from the Night Reaver's darkness but no less absolute. "Do you know what happens to servants who displease me?" His voice was silk over steel. "No, Your Majesty. They disappear." He leaned closer, and only she could hear his next words, whispered so low they barely registered. "Tell me you're lying. Tell me you're not the one he stopped, jaw clenching. Tell me this isn't real." "I can't," she breathed back, just as quietly. "I'm sorry." For one terrible moment, she thought he might strike her. Might order her execution right there in front of the entire court. Instead, he straightened, his face settling into a mask of cold indifference. "Lord Cassius. This servant is unsuitable. Remove her from the castle." The words fell like an axe. "Your Majesty." Cassius sounded confused. "Send her back to her family. Now. Today." Kale's voice carried absolute authority. "I want her gone before nightfall. Before nightfall. Before he transformed. Before the Night Reaver woke and discovered what the daytime king had done." Milena felt her world crumbling. She'd survived being sold, survived the Night Reaver, survived falling in love with a cursed king. But she wouldn't survive this, being sent back to the family that had traded her away, being erased from Kale's life because he was too afraid to let both halves of himself want the same thing. "As you command, Your Majesty," Cassius bowed. Guards materialized at her sides, gripping her arms. As they dragged her away, she looked back once. The Vampire King had already returned to his throne, his attention on the visiting dignitary, as if she'd never existed at all. But she'd felt it in that moment when their eyes met. Felt the war raging inside him, felt his soul reaching for hers even as he commanded her removal. He was saving her life the only way he knew how. By destroying everything they'd built in darkness. They didn't take her home. House Valen refused to accept her return. A disgrace once traded couldn't be taken back without losing face. Instead, Lord Cassius deposited her at a way station on the border of the king's territory, gave her 3 silver coins, and left her to whatever fate awaited discarded servants. Milena stood in the dusty courtyard as his carriage disappeared into the distance, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. She had nothing. No family. No home. No purpose. Just 3 coins and the memory of crimson eyes in both darkness and light. She should have felt destroyed. Instead, she felt numb. The way station keeper, a grizzled human woman with kind eyes, offered her a room for the night. "You look like you've been through hell, girl." "Something like that," Milena murmured. She spent the afternoon sitting by the window, watching the sun crawl across the sky toward the horizon. Somewhere in that distant castle, Cale would be preparing for transformation. Would he remember banishing her? Would the Night Reaver wake and realize what his other half had done? Would he rage, or would he accept it as the mercy it was meant to be? As sunset approached, casting the world in shades of amber and crimson, a commotion erupted outside. Horses. Shouting. The clash of steel. Milena moved to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. A group of vampire nobles had surrounded the way station, their elegant clothes marking them as court members. At their center stood a face she recognized from the throne room, Lord Theron, one of the king's council members who'd been watching her with particular interest during her brief appearance. "Search everywhere," he commanded. "The blood-deficient girl must be here." The way station keeper protested, but they shoved past her, tearing through rooms with ruthless efficiency. Milena's door burst open, and suddenly she was staring down 3 vampires with murder in their ancient eyes. "There you are." Lord Theron smiled, revealing elongated fangs. "Did you think we wouldn't notice? That we wouldn't see the way our king looked at you? I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar." He grabbed her arm, yanking her from the room. 200 years we've watched him suffer that curse. 200 years we've consolidated power while he remained fractured and weak. And now, when we're so close to claiming the kingdom entirely, some defective servant threatens everything? Understanding crashed through her. "You don't want the curse broken." "Why would we?" Another noble laughed. "A cursed king is a weak king. We've been ruling in his shadow for decades, waiting for him to finally lose himself completely to the beast. But you," his eyes glittered with malice, "you've been soothing him. Making him stronger. We can't allow that." They dragged her outside as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in blood red. Lord Theron drew a ceremonial dagger, its blade etched with symbols that made her skin crawl. "The king will transform soon," he said conversationally. "And when the Night Reaver wakes, we'll present him with your corpse. Show him that attachment leads only to destruction. Break whatever remains of his fractured soul. And finally, the beast will consume the king entirely, and will put him down like the monster he is." Milena struggled, but vampire strength was absolute. They forced her to her knees, Theron positioning the blade against her throat. The sun sank lower, shadows lengthening, darkness creeping across the land. "Any last words, defective girl?" She closed her eyes, reaching out with that strange awareness one final time. Somewhere in that distant castle, she felt it, the transformation beginning, the curse ripping through Cale as it did every sunset. She felt his agony, his rage, his soul screaming as darkness claimed him. And then she felt something else. Recognition. The Night Reaver, waking to memories of her banishment, understanding instantly what his daytime self had done, feeling her absence like a wound torn fresh. "Kale," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I'm sorry." The blade began its descent. And then the world exploded into shadow. Darkness erupted from nowhere, slamming into the vampires with the force of a hurricane. Lord Theron went flying, his dagger clattering across stone. The others scattered, screaming, as something massive and terrible materialized in their midst. The Night Reaver had come. He was more monstrous than Milena had ever seen him, darkness writhing around him like living fury, his form barely containing the rage pouring through him. He moved through the vampire nobles like death itself, tearing through them with claws of pure shadow, his roar shaking the very foundations of the way station. "You dare!" His voice was barely recognizable, distorted by fury and the fresh agony of transformation. "You dare touch what is mine!" Lord Theron tried to flee, but Kale was faster. He grabbed the vampire lord by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "You wanted to break me? Wanted to use her to destroy what remained of my soul?" "Your Majesty," Theron choked out. "I am not your king in this form." Kale's grip tightened. "I am your nightmare. And you have made a fatal mistake." The sound of Theron's neck snapping echoed across the courtyard. The remaining nobles fled into the darkness, unwilling to face the Night Reaver's full wrath. Kale let them go, his attention already turning to where Milena knelt trembling in the dust. He crossed to her in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her, his monstrous form shaking. "Are you hurt?" "How?" Her voice came out broken. "How did you find me?" "I felt you." His clawed hands hovered over her, afraid to touch, afraid he might break her. "The moment I transformed, I felt your terror. Your pain. And I knew," his voice cracked, "I knew my other self had sent you away, and I knew they would come for you because we're too weak to protect what we love." "Kale." He thought he was saving you. The words poured out of him like confession. He thought banishing you would keep you safe from the court's politics, from the danger of being connected to a cursed king. But all he did was put you directly in harm's way. You saved me. I nearly lost you. He finally touched her face, his cold fingers gentle despite the claws. "I have existed for 2 centuries in torment, believing I deserved every moment of suffering. But losing you," his crimson eyes blazed, "losing you would be the one punishment I couldn't bear." Milena reached up, covering his hand with hers. "Then don't lose me. Choose me. Both of you, day and night, king and beast, choose me." "I choose you," he breathed. "God help us both, I choose you." And there, in the ruins of an assassination attempt, covered in dust and blood, Milena Valen kissed the monster who'd crossed the kingdom to save her. The curse shuddered around them, cracking. They returned to the castle before dawn, traveling through darkness on horseback with Milena wrapped in Kale's crimson cloak. He remained in his Night Reaver form, darkness still writhing around him, but she could feel the curse weakening with every mile they covered together. The crack spreading through the ancient magic that had bound him for 2 centuries. "What happens when the sun rises?" she asked as the castle towers came into view against the pre-dawn sky. "I don't know." His arms tightened around her. "The curse has never been this unstable. When we kissed, when I chose you, something fundamental shifted. I can feel both halves of myself reaching toward each other instead of tearing apart. It's never done that before." They entered through the main gates this time, not the servants' entrance. Guards scattered at the sight of the Night Reaver carrying a blood-deficient girl through the castle halls. Nobles who'd been preparing for morning court pressed themselves against walls, terror written across their immortal faces. Kale brought her to the throne room and set her down gently before the obsidian throne. Around them, the castle's architecture seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever came next. "When dawn breaks," he said quietly, the daytime king will wake with full memory of this night. Of choosing you. Of killing Lord Theron. Of bringing you back here in defiance of his own orders. His crimson eyes met hers. He'll have to make the same choice I did. And if he doesn't, if he rejects you in daylight, the curse will solidify again. Stronger than before. And if he chooses me? Then we find out if love really can break a sovereign curse. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the tall windows. Milena watched in awe and terror as the transformation began. But this time, it was different. Instead of the violent tearing she'd felt before, instead of the agony of a soul being ripped in two, there was something almost gentle about it. The darkness around Cale didn't explode outward, it folded inward, condensing, reshaping. He fell to his knees, gasping, and she dropped beside him, taking his hand. Through their connection, she felt both halves of his consciousness surfacing simultaneously. The Night Reaver and the Vampire King, no longer separate, no longer at war, but slowly, painfully, beginning to merge. The transformation lasted minutes that felt like hours. When it finally completed, when the last of the shadows settled into flesh, the man kneeling before her was neither beast nor king alone. He was whole. Cale opened his eyes, still crimson, still burning with ancient power, but no longer fractured. No longer screaming. He stared at his hands, at the absence of claws, at the solid flesh where darkness had writhed for 200 years. It's gone. His voice shook with disbelief. The curse, it's actually gone. Both halves. Milena breathed. Both halves. He looked at her with wonder. I remember everything. Night and day, beast and king, all of it existing in one consciousness for the first time since the curse began. He laughed, the sound breaking with emotion, I am just myself again. Tears streamed down Milena's face as she threw her arms around him. He caught her, holding her tight, and she felt his soul through their connection, no longer fractured, no longer in agony, but whole and reaching for hers with desperate gratitude. You did this, he whispered into her hair. You loved both halves of me when I couldn't love either. You saw worth in the monster and humanity in the king. You made me whole. We made each other whole. He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. The curse is broken, but the court is in chaos. Half my nobles conspired to keep me weak, to let the beast consume the king. They'll face justice. But first, he stood, pulling her up with him, and turned to face the gathered court members who'd crept into the throne room to witness the impossible. Milena Vallon, his voice rang out with absolute authority, was traded to this court as a blood-deficient servant. Broken, they called her. Worthless. Defective. He took her hand, his grip firm and sure. But she is the one who saw past the curse, who loved without fear, who broke a 200-year-old binding through sheer courage and compassion. He lifted her hand high. I declare before this court that Milena Vallon will be my queen. Not despite her differences, but because of them. Because she understood that being broken by the world's standards doesn't mean being worthless. It means you survived what should have destroyed you. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Several nobles looked ready to protest, but one look at Cale's face, at the power radiating from him now that he was finally whole, silenced any objection. Those who conspired against me have until sunset to flee my kingdom, he continued coldly. Those who remain will answer for treason. But those who choose loyalty, who choose to embrace a new era where worth isn't measured by bloodlines alone, you will find me a fair king. Perhaps for the first time in centuries. He turned back to Milena, his expression softening. What do you say? Will you have a formerly cursed vampire king who spent 200 years as a monster? She smiled through her tears. Only if he'll have a blood-deficient girl who was sold like cattle. I think that's the best trade anyone's ever made. He kissed her then, in front of the entire court, sealing the promise. And through their connection, Milena felt something new stirring, not just his whole soul reaching for hers, but something else. Something small and precious, growing in the space where two broken beings had found each other and become whole. Life. New life. An heir born of impossible love. 3 months later, when Milena stood before the court in a gown of midnight blue and silver, a crown of thorns and roses resting on her head, she placed Cale's hand over her stomach and watched his eyes widen with understanding. "We're not just whole," she whispered. "We're creating something entirely new." And the Vampire King, who'd spent 2 centuries trapped between forms, who'd believed himself unworthy of love, who'd been broken by a curse and remade by compassion, smiled with pure joy. "A family," he breathed. "We're creating a family." In the end, it wasn't power that saved them. It wasn't bloodlines or ancient magic or vampire supremacy. It was simply this: 2 broken beings who chose each other when the world had deemed them both unworthy. And that choice, that terrifying, beautiful choice, made them whole at last.